What you thought would be a quiet weekend getaway turned into a story you'll never tell without fear, because something was watching you long before you realized it. We're going to share some of the creepiest cabin horror stories, the kind that will make you think twice before staying alone in the woods. But before we jump in, don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps us out. And if you've ever experienced something strange, creepy, or just downright unexplainable, we'd love to hear about it. In 2019, I took my wife Claire and our 12-year-old daughter Emily to my grandfather's old cabin in the White River National Forest. The place was deep in the woods, far from any town, with no cell signal and no neighbors for miles. I thought it would be the perfect quiet spot for a weekend away. We left the car near the start of the forest trail. Now, the year before, I had tied orange ribbons to the trees to mark the path leading to the cabin, just in case we needed help finding our way back. Fortunately, those ribbons were still there. They looked old and faded, but they were still hanging. The cabin was small, with old wooden walls and a front porch standing alone in the middle of tall trees. The first few hours were peaceful. The forest felt calm in a natural way, the kind of quiet you expect when you're far away from everything. But as the sun went down, the place slowly started to feel different. The sounds of birds and insects faded, until it became completely silent. Not a single sound from anywhere. Then, around midnight, I suddenly heard light footsteps outside. I stayed still for a while, listening. Then walked to the window and looked outside. But I didn't see anything unusual. Still, the feeling didn't leave. The feeling that someone was out there watching us. I didn't wake Claire. I knew if I told her now, it would only scare her. Maybe even Emily too. And I wasn't even sure what I heard. In the morning, the forest looked normal again. I stepped outside early and walked around the cabin. There were no footprints. No signs of anything unusual. Everything seemed fine. After breakfast, we packed our things and got ready to leave. I wanted to head back to the car before the afternoon. So I started walking down the trail first to check the path. But after just a few steps, I stopped. The orange markers I had tied last year were gone. The trees that had them just yesterday were now completely bare. I walked further, hoping maybe I had missed them. But there were no markers anywhere. It didn't make any sense. I kept going a little more, looking for anything familiar. But the deeper I went, the more strange everything started to feel. The path didn't look the same, and the forest around me felt different, like I was walking through a place I didn't recognize anymore. That's when I decided to turn back to the cabin. But when we reached it, my stomach dropped. There were new trail markers tied to the trees near the cabin. But they weren't mine. They were made of a different kind of cloth. And they didn't lead back to where we came from. They pointed somewhere else. Whoever had removed the original markers had left these on purpose. I didn't know if it was a warning or a trap, but it was clear someone was out there. Someone who knew this forest better than I did. Someone who had been close enough to remove every marker without us ever hearing a sound. As night started to fall again, I locked the door and closed the windows. The night passed slowly. The forest outside was still, but I could feel it. The presence of someone moving around us. Small footsteps on dry leaves came and went without warning. Quiet steps, always staying just far enough from the cabin. By morning, the decision was clear. We could not stay here any longer. My wife and daughter were already awake and afraid. The only path left to try was the one marked by the new cloth tied to the trees. We didn't have much choice. So we left the cabin and started following the new markers deeper into the forest, hoping they might somehow lead us back to the car or at least to a road. We walked for almost an hour. But then I started noticing something that didn't feel right. The shape of the trees ahead, it looked familiar. Too familiar. I had seen this spot before. At first, I thought maybe I was just tired or imagining things. But the feeling kept getting stronger the further we walked. The trail curved around a small rocky area exactly the same way I remembered passing earlier. I stopped right there, and my stomach sank. We were walking in a loop. Someone had guided us in a perfect circle, without us even realizing it. I tried leading us in another direction off the marked trail, but the thick trees, uneven ground, fallen branches. It was like the forest didn't want us to leave. Every path we tried eventually led us right back to the same spot. For hours. Hours passed like that, trying again and again to find a way out. But we were stuck, trapped in the middle of nowhere, with no idea who was out there watching us or what they wanted. And I knew staying in this loop would only make us weaker. I stopped walking and forced myself to think clearly. The new markers were leading us nowhere. I turned around and looked carefully at the trees, away from the path. After a while, I saw something in the distance. A small piece of orange cloth tied to a tree. half hidden behind the branches. It was one of my original markers. Without wasting a second, I walked toward it. The forest felt untouched here. No signs of cut branches or stacked stones. We followed the old markers, and after some time, I saw the dirt road in the distance. Our car was still there. We got inside quickly and drove away from that place. But I didn't want to leave without reporting what had happened. There was a forest ranger station a few miles down the main road. It was the closest place we could go. At the ranger station, I told the forest ranger everything. The missing markers, the footprints, the looped trail, all of it. He listened quietly, like he had heard it all before. Then he told us something I'll never forget. Reports like ours had been coming in for the past 2 months. People getting lost in the same area. Strange things happening on the trails. He looked at us and said, "You're lucky. The last family that got caught out there didn't make it out in time." He didn't go into detail, didn't say exactly what happened to them, but the way he said it made my skin crawl. The ranger also told us they'd been investigating, checking the area over and over, but whoever or whatever was doing this, they still hadn't found them. He said the forest was huge, and not every part of it was safe for visitors. There wasn't much else to say after that. I just nodded, thanked him, and we left. Even now, I still think about what happened, about how easily things could have gone wrong, and how lucky we were to get out of there when we did. I'll never go back to that place again. Not after what I saw, not after what I felt, not after what I know is still out there. What I felt out there, I'll never forget. It was January 2017. I was around 22 years old and in college. Exams had just ended, and we all needed a break. My friends Jake and Eric agreed, and Eric brought along his cousin Matt, plus Matt's friend, Sarah. We decided to rent a cabin far away from everything, deep in northern Minnesota. Matt found the place online. It was cheap, listed as quiet and remote, exactly what we wanted. We paid cash, and the owner didn't ask questions. The drive took almost 6 hours. Soon there was no phone signal, no houses, no gas stations, only trees covered in snow. The cabin appeared smaller than it did in the photos. It was old but solid enough. The key was exactly where the owner said it would be. Inside it was plain. A fireplace, a small kitchen, one bed, and a couch. We set up our sleeping bags, cooked some food, and settled in. Everyone was tired, so we went to bed early. In the morning, I woke before anyone else and stepped outside. Snow covered everything, smooth and untouched. As I walked around to the back of the cabin, I noticed something in the ground. A wooden cover. It was round and flat, partially buried beneath the snow. I brushed the snow away with my boot. It looked like the top of an old well, which seemed strange. The owner had never mentioned anything like that. Then suddenly, I felt like something moved beneath it. I stood completely still and listened carefully, but I didn't hear anything. I told myself I was imagining things. I didn't think much more about it, and went back inside. The day passed normally. Everyone stayed indoors, busy with games and food. I didn't mention the well, but it stayed in the back of my mind. The cabin felt colder that night, even with the fire going strong. Then, around midnight, I heard a soft sound from behind the cabin. Footsteps, crunching slowly through the snow. Then something dragged across the frozen ground, but the noise stopped as suddenly as it had started. I couldn't sleep again after that. When daylight finally came, I went outside to check. The snow near the well was disturbed. Deep marks stretched from the wooden cover into the woods. No footprints, no animal tracks, only long lines scratched deeply into the snow heading toward the trees. And the nails holding down the well cover, they were slightly bent, as if something had tried to force it open. I went back inside quickly, not wanting to stay near the well any longer. I told everyone we needed to leave immediately. At first, they hesitated, but when they saw how serious I was, they agreed. By noon, everything was loaded into the car. We were ready to leave, but when Jake tried starting the car, the engine sputtered, but didn't catch. He tried again. Still nothing. And then, from behind the cabin, I heard the dragging sound again. Only this time, it was much heavier. I turned my head toward the noise came from near the corner of the cabin. Standing there was a figure. It was unusually tall, thin, and hunched, with long arms hanging nearly to the ground. Its fingers looked like claws. For a moment, none of us moved. Jake turned the key again, and finally, the engine roared to life. He immediately threw the car into gear and pulled onto the narrow road leading away from the cabin. I glanced back through the rear window and saw it clearly. It stepped out from behind the cabin. It didn't chase us, but somehow, I knew it could have if it wanted to. We drove without stopping. No one spoke, not until we reached a gas station miles away. After that day, we never returned to the cabin. None of us talked much about what we saw, but I couldn't forget. We were lucky to leave when we did. Still, I wonder about the next group who might stay there. Maybe they wouldn't notice the well. Maybe they wouldn't hear the noises. Or maybe they'd find it and realize too late what was buried beneath the cabin. A few years ago, my boyfriend Jake and I rented a lakeside cabin near Lake Tahoe for a weekend getaway. The cabin was in a quiet, isolated area, facing a beautiful, calm lake. When we arrived on Friday afternoon, everything seemed perfect. We unpacked our bags, cooked dinner, and spent the evening relaxing in the living room, watching the sun set over the lake. On Saturday morning, I stepped outside to enjoy the fresh air and noticed a wooden boat floating in the middle of the lake. I didn't think much of it at the time, assuming it had come loose from another dock nearby. When I mentioned it to Jake, he just shrugged it off as nothing unusual. So we went about our day, exploring nearby trails and enjoying the beautiful weather. But later that evening, just after dark, I glanced out the cabin window again and saw the same boat, only now it had moved much closer, floating just a short distance from our dock. I pointed it out to Jake and we stared at it for a long moment. Neither of us said much, but it felt off, like something wasn't right. That night, we stayed in the living room talking, and every so often, I found myself glancing toward the window, checking the water for movement, but the boat remained still, unmoving, waiting. Jake stepped outside to get firewood and I followed behind him, heading toward the lake for a closer look. The boat was now touching the dock. Feeling apprehensive, I leaned over and looked inside. At first glance, the boat appeared empty, just wet boards and a puddle of water from the overnight dew. But when I looked again, something caught my eye. A photograph, partially tucked beneath one of the wooden seats. It was an image of Jake and me, sitting together on the cabin sofa, clearly talking, completely unaware that someone had been watching us from just outside our window. I stood frozen on the dock, staring at the photo. Jake noticed my expression and came quickly to see. Without saying a word, I handed him the picture. His face changed immediately. We rushed back inside, shutting the door behind us. Then Jake moved quickly around the cabin, checking every window, every door. Fortunately, everything seemed locked, just as we had left it. But that didn't ease the growing dread I felt. We didn't speak much. There wasn't much to say. We both understood the danger. Someone had deliberately placed that boat and picture there, making sure we'd find it. We packed our things, not bothering to organize or fold anything. Finally, after stuffing our bags into the car, I glanced one last time toward the lake and felt a shiver run down my spine. We drove away from the cabin, neither of us speaking until we reached town. Our first stop was the local police station. Unfortunately, there wasn't much they could do. Nobody had technically trespassed or harmed us. Without more direct evidence, they simply didn't have enough reason to investigate further. Later, I searched online for stories about that lakeside area and found posts describing similar events. Boats drifting toward cabins, strange photographs left behind. Clearly, we weren't the only ones. I called the police again, hoping this new information would make a difference. But sadly, it didn't. Without threats or direct harm, they still couldn't investigate further. They simply advised us to be careful. Eventually, Jake and I forced ourselves to move on, but we avoided isolated vacations altogether, preferring busy, safer places instead. In 2007, I was doing my PhD at the University of Florida. I was around 30 years old, living alone in a condo I owned in Gainesville. I had a friend, let's call him Captain, who was walking across the United States. When he took a break from his journey in Alabama, he asked to stay at my place for the winter. A mutual friend drove him to my condo from where he had stopped. We had a nice Thanksgiving together, and then Captain stayed at my place for a few months. It wasn't a huge problem, since I was mostly staying at my boyfriend's house. But having him there for so long started to feel like a bit too much. When it was finally time for Captain to start walking again, he asked me to drive him back to the exact spot in Alabama where he had stopped. I was happy to do it, because honestly, I was ready to have my house to myself again. I don't remember the exact route, but I do remember that the drive wasn't as long as I thought, maybe 5 or 6 hours one way. I dropped him off in the early evening and started driving back to Florida. That meant I was alone, driving at night in a place I didn't really know. The GPS we had back then gave me a really strange and out-of-the-way route. When I drove Captain out, most of the trip was on the freeway, but going back, the map app told me to take a bunch of small back roads through the Alabama countryside. The area felt creepy, like something from a scary movie. I was already feeling uneasy. I kept checking in with my boyfriend now and then, just to let him know where I was. I've driven alone at night many times. That part wasn't new to me, but because of past experiences with strangers, I'm always alert, always careful. After a while, I noticed a car behind me. At first, I didn't think it was anything strange. I figured maybe they were just taking the same weird route because of the GPS. But after a few miles, the car was still following me. I kept watching it in my mirror, which meant I wasn't paying much attention to the road. That's when I reached a small town and realized I was about to turn left at the wrong intersection. There were 2 turns very close to each other. I was already in the left lane for the first one, but I was supposed to turn at the second. It didn't seem like a big deal. The roads were empty. It was around 2 o'clock in the morning. When the light turned green, I drove straight through the intersection and then turned left at the correct street. But the car behind me did the exact same thing. That's when I knew for sure I was being followed. I kept checking my rearview mirror, but I still couldn't see who was driving. I couldn't understand why this person was following me. At first, I even tried to joke about it in my head, thinking maybe it was because of my University of Florida license plate frame. I told myself, maybe they like a rival football team and are just trying to mess with me for fun. But deep down, I knew this didn't feel like a joke. Now, I'm a tall woman, so maybe the driver behind me couldn't tell that I was a woman. But either way, it didn't matter. It was clear now. This person was definitely following me. And since I knew I'd have to stop my car soon, I was feeling more and more unsafe by the minute. Finally, the strange route through those dark back roads led me into a bigger city. There were streetlights now, stores still lit up. I started to feel a little safer, but I still needed gas, and I couldn't avoid stopping. I had already made a plan for what I would do at the gas station. When I reached a well-lit intersection, I turned all the way around in my seat and stared directly at the car behind me. I also pretended to talk on the phone, making it obvious. I wanted them to think I was telling someone what the car looked like, maybe even describing the driver. The light turned green. I kept the act going. Not long after that, I finally saw a gas station, bright, well-lit, safe enough. My car was almost out of gas, and I was silently praying I wouldn't get stranded in the middle of nowhere. I pulled into the station and parked in a way so that my door was right next to the store entrance. Then I got out of the car and ran straight inside. I told the gas station worker that someone had been following me for over an hour. He immediately came out from behind the counter and walked over to the windows to look outside. But no one was there. I was sure the car had been right behind me when I pulled into the station. But maybe when they saw me run inside, they drove away. I still don't know what that person wanted. They followed me for at least an hour and a half. We packed our things, not bothering to organize or fold anything. Finally, after stuffing our bags into the car, I glanced one last time toward the lake and felt a shiver run down my spine. We drove away from the cabin, neither of us speaking until we reached town. Our first stop was the local police station. Unfortunately, there wasn't much they could do. Nobody had technically trespassed or harmed us. Without more direct evidence, They simply didn't have enough reason to investigate further. Later, I searched online for stories about that lakeside area and found posts describing similar events. Boats drifting toward cabins. Strange photographs left behind. Clearly, we weren't the only ones. I called the police again, hoping this new information would make a difference. But sadly, it didn't. Without threats or direct harm, they still couldn't investigate further. They simply advised us to be careful. Eventually, Jake and I forced ourselves to move on. But we avoided isolated vacations altogether, preferring busy, safer places instead. In 2007, I was doing my PhD at the University of Florida. I was around 30 years old, living alone in a condo I owned in Gainesville. I had a friend, let's call him Captain, who was walking across the United States. When he took a break from his journey in Alabama, he asked to stay at my place for the winter. A mutual friend drove him to my condo from where he had stopped. We had a nice Thanksgiving together, and then Captain stayed at my place for a few months. It wasn't a huge problem, since I was mostly staying at my boyfriend's house. But having him there for so long started to feel like a bit too much. When it was finally time for Captain to start walking again, he asked me to drive him back to the exact spot in Alabama where he had stopped. I was happy to do it, because honestly, I was ready to have my house to myself again. I don't remember the exact route, but I do remember that the drive wasn't as long as I thought, maybe 5 or 6 hours one way. I dropped him off in the early evening and started driving back to Florida. That meant I was alone, driving at night in a place I didn't really know. The GPS we had back then gave me a really strange and out-of-the-way route. When I drove Captain out, most of the trip was on the freeway, but going back, the map app told me to take a bunch of small back roads through the Alabama countryside. The area felt creepy, like something from a scary movie. I was already feeling uneasy. I kept checking in with my boyfriend now and then, just to let him know where I was. I've driven alone at night many times. That part wasn't new to me. But because of past experiences with strangers, I'm always alert, always careful. After a while, I noticed a car behind me.